It's the International Soccer Preview. We are Soccerphiles Canada. Welcome to Series 25, looking at the players of Euro 2024. This episode is looking at the players of Ukraine. Here we go! Hello and welcome again to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and we continue Series 25 on the groups and players of the 2024 Euro Cup. This episode covers Ukraine's players, and in fact it's part two of the players media cast, and here we look at the selections. In part one we made a list of the candidates and introduced them and their likelihood of making the squad, and there is a link to part one in the show notes. This episode then is part two, and we're dividing this into two sections. In section one, we look over the list we compiled in part one to see who made it and who didn't. And in section two, we summarize surprises in the selections and review injuries. Let's begin then. Well, we have a couple of orders of business before we begin. The first is my shirt. This is my default Euro 2020 shirt, for which is basically an admission that I don't have a Ukraine shirt, but I do claim the colors. There's a light blue and a yellow in there, and so it's all purposeful. Making a connection with the Ukraine flag there. Our second order of business is the preliminary squad. So look at preliminary squad briefly. And Ukraine put out a 26-man roster on May 16th. One of the first teams to put a squad to put their roster out, if not the first. May 16th and have made no changes since, despite 3 warm-up games. Some other teams had some injuries in warm-up games which caused them to have to make some changes, but not Ukraine. It's just the 26-man roster from May 16th, no preliminary squad. And as I mentioned, they do have those 3 warm-up games, the first against Germany, the second against Poland, the third against Moldova, all in early March. And we think that the first one and the third one represent more their starting lineups, whereas the second one against Poland was more experimental, giving some field time to their substitute and bench players. That's what we think, but if we're put on a stand to testify this to in court, we will say that we know nothing. All right, on we go to section 1 then, and look at the candidates from the list we compiled in section 1. And we begin with manager Sergei Rebrov, and he is still manager, not fired beforehand, so we'll say that he was a selection, and we'll move on to the goalkeepers. For goalkeepers, we had 2 definite candidates, Anatoly Trubin, who was selected, and Jorge Bushan, also selected for the squad. And then we had our likely candidate, Andriy Lunin, also selected for the squad. The possible candidate, Dmytro Riznik, not selected. And what we do notice, actually, a pattern is that when squads like Belgium and Ukraine put out a 26-man final roster early and immediately, is that it tends to be the expected candidates there. Okay, as far as the warm-up games, each one of those players started one of them. Lunin started the last one, although yes, we in part 1 decided that this was a pretty contentious decision. Could be any one of them. Lunin might be a hint, having started the third game, that he's going to be the starter, but not strong evidence there. Okay, on to the central defense. And we had 3, make that 2 definite candidates there. The first one was Ilya Zabarny, and he was selected, and so was the other definite candidate, Mykola Matvienko, also selected for the final squad. We had 4 possible candidates. Teams usually bring 5 or 6 central defenders to the cup. The first one was Serhii Krivtsov, and he was not selected. The second one, Sergei, I have them in a different order here. So it looks like we moved Alexander Svatov up to the top spot, and he was selected. The second one was Sergei Krivtsov, and he was not selected. The third one, Valery Bondar, was named to the squad. And finally, Maxim Talovarov also selected there. So 5 central defenders. We had a possible but unlikely candidate in Denis Popov, and he was not selected. So just 5 candidates here. And let's take a look at the warm-up games. We had Bondar and Talovarev in the second game. Again, that's the one we think was a bit of a B team game. In the first game, it was a 3-man defense, and it was the first 3 candidates on our list: Zabarny, Matvienko, and Svatov. And in the third game, just 2 of them, Zabarny and Matvienko. So that kind of falling in line with the order that we had them on the list, looking like Zabarny and Matvienko, the starters there. Okay, up to or over to left back position, and here we have a definite candidate in Vitaly Mykolenko, and he was selected despite an injury concern, which we'll talk about at the end. But Mykolenko selected for the final squad. Also, Bohdan Mikhailichenko was a possible candidate, and he was selected for the squad. However, possible but unlikely candidate Edward Sobol not selected. In the warm-up games, it was actually Zinchenko starting as a right back, often starts in the midfield for Ukraine, but as a right back, as he does for Arsenal here. In the second game, it was Mykolenko, and actually in the third game too. So not following the pattern exactly, but it looks like Mykolenko is the starter there, having started 2 of the 3 games. Again, Zinchenko possibly starting upfield. We'll talk about it more, but actually he did not start in the second or third game there, so I'm a bit concerned about that. We don't have any injury tag on him, but I should wait until we get to when we actually talk about him. Let's go to what we're supposed to be talking about, the right back position, and we have Yukim Konoplia as a definite candidate who was selected, and 2 possible candidates here. The first of them, Alexander Karavayev, actually a right midfielder, but we moved him back to defense because that's where he appeared, but he was not selected. The other one, though, Alexander Chimchuk, was chosen for the final squad. In terms of the warm-up games, it was Konoplia in the first game, Chimchuk in the second, and back to Konoplia in the third game. So that makes us, kind of reinforces our belief that Konoplia is the starter on that side. Now we get to midfielders, and we meet Zinchenko, who we moved to defensive midfield, because that's where he played mostly since the beginning of 2023. I think he was in various positions, and he's coded as an attacking midfielder for Ukraine. Anyway, we have him here as a definite candidate, and he was selected. He is the captain of the team now. I think that was a recent decision. We had 2 possible candidates at defensive midfield here, with Taras Stepanenko and Vladimir Brazko. Both of those were selected for the squad. And we'll look at central midfielders before looking at the warm-up games there. We had a likely candidate in Sergei Sidorchuk, who was selected, and 2 possible candidates there. Vitaly Buyalski, not selected. Their injury may have been a part of that, and we'll talk about that in section 2. And Mykola Shaparenko, the other possible candidate was selected for the squad. We had two possible but unlikely candidates. The first, Alexander Pikhalyanok, was not selected, and injury may have played a role. The second one, Igor Nazarina, simply not selected there. And let's look then at the warm-up games. And here we have basically Stepanenko and Shaparenko, the two central midfield, one's a defensive midfielder. Those two started in the middle against Germany, and also in the third game. That was the pairing. In the middle game, it was two different players, Malinovsky and Sidorchuk. So once again, suggesting that the third and first game were more what we expect to step on the field in the cup. Let's go over to left midfielders. We actually only had one candidate here at the possible but unlikely level, and that was Yevhen Konoplyanka, and he was not selected. We didn't have any candidates for right midfielders, so we move up to the left attacking midfielder position, and here we only had one candidate in this category. It was Mikhailo Mudryk as a definite candidate, and Mudryk started the first and third games there too. In the middle game, it was Zubkov, who we'll meet shortly, playing on the left side. Let's go over to the attacking right, where there are more candidates. In fact, Zubkov is one of the candidates here, and we have Viktor Tushankov as a likely candidate who was selected. Andrei Yarmolenko also here, coded as an attacking midfielder / forward, but has played on the right more recently. And then Alexander Zubkov, who we just saw starting on the left in the middle game. We have one more candidate. It is possible but unlikely Oleksiy Kuchuliak, and he was not selected. So let's look at the warm-up games there. In the first game, we see Tishankov, and he also started there in the third game, but in the second game, it was Yarmolenko. So again, not definitive evidence, but suggestive that Tishankov is the starter on the right. Up to the central attacking midfield, and we had two candidates here. The first was a definite candidate, Georgy Sudakov, and he was selected for the final squad. And the other, Ruslan Malinovsky, also selected for the squad. Okay, they didn't actually use this position in the games that they had. And so I'm just looking to see if these players started. Sudakov did start the second game as a forward in a two-man forward line there. He was the left forward, and he started as the right forward in a two-man forward line in the second game there too. So basically that looks like a nod towards Sudakov as a starter. I should say actually Yaremchuk, no, sorry, we haven't gotten to Yaremchuk yet. So let's just move on to the forward line. We did have one player coded as a secondary striker, but it was Roman Bez, who's a retired player now. So there are really no viable candidates there. So we move to our last category, the forwards. And here we find a definite candidate in Artem Dovbyk, and two likely candidates. The first, Roman Yaremchuk, and both of those made it to the squad, Dovbyk and Yaremchuk, and so did our third candidate, also at the likely level, Vladislav Vanat, selected for the final squad. However, our possible but unlikely Danilo Sikan not selected for the squad. So we go back once again to the warm-up games, and we see Yaremchuk started the first game and was a co-forward in the third game. So he is looking actually more likely than Dovbyk, who started the second game as a co-forward. So if that pattern is holding true, it would suggest that Yaremchuk is looking a bit more likely. Okay, and that is it for our look at the players. There are your 26 players for Ukraine, and let's do part 2 or section 2, where we look at the surprises. So as I said at the beginning, usually when they name a squad that quickly and that firmly, there really aren't any surprises. They go with what they've been going with, and that seems to be the case. No notable non-selections, no surprise inclusions, no new players for Ukraine. So let's go on to the injury section, and we do have one player. We'll call him recovered from injury, and that is left back Vitaly Mykolenko, who we did see starting in the warm-up games. He had been out with an ankle injury for the last 4 game weeks of the season, and in fact was out for the first friendly there, which is why Zinchenko played the role possibly. But he was back for the last 2 games, so a bit of a non-issue there. I don't think I came back to address Zinchenko, but we didn't see him appearing in the second or third games. I just wanted to see if he came on as a substitute. He did at halftime in the second game, and 30 minutes into the third game, he replaced Mykolenko in the right back position there. So no worries about Zinchenko. Not sure why he didn't start, but that's okay. And then we have the only other injury concerns we have are for players who are not strong candidates anyway. So we have central midfielder Vitaly Buyalski, who was not selected for the squad, but was only a possible candidate. He did play to the end of the season with his club, but he was injured for all 3 warm-up games. That was an unknown injury with an unknown return date. And he had actually been injured for Euro 2022. So we don't know whether he would have been selected or whether the injury is the sole cause of his non-selection. But Buyalski missing another tournament, and perhaps down to injury there too. The other one is a possible but unlikely candidate, Alexander Halyanok, and he's a central midfielder, was injured for the last 4 clubs of his matches from mid-April to early May, and then he came back for 2 matches, and then he was out with an unknown injury for the last match of the season in late May. So he's down with an unknown return date, but even his participation suggested that he wouldn't have been selected even if the injury wasn't a factor. Okay, that is it for Ukraine, and so we wish Ukraine luck in the cup, and we hope that knowing the players a bit better through our mediacast helps you to enjoy it more. We would like to thank Mike Kripak, Make Sound Music, and Pixabay for the wonderful background music called Dance 90s accompanying this mediacast.